Hey guys, to help run the forums, host the website, and travel, we've introduced a universal service fee for in-depth coverage, including this video. The goal is to be transparent and unbiased. This is not an endorsement. It's a privilege to serve you. Let's get into it. Hey guys, what's going on? So I am here checking out the new edition of the Liberty Trike. So this is the brand new 2019 Liberty Trike with some of the cool upgrades that they've come out with. So I'm really excited to show you because I first came into contact with the Liberty Trike, it must have been 2016 or so, and it's gone over a lot of iterations, changed a lot of cool stuff. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump in. All right, so the Liberty Trike is overall a very small vehicle. You're looking at 16-inch wheels for the front and both of them on the back. It is a trike, so balance is pretty good, but it's also relatively narrow. And the narrowness allows it to get in and out of doors pretty easily. I actually know this firsthand because aside from testing it here, we also had a Liberty Trike when I worked at an electric bike store, and we had a very narrow doorway, a particularly narrow doorway from a building that was 100 years old or so. And the Liberty Trike fit through, which most other trikes, it'd be impossible to get that through. So it'll totally go through the front door of any kind of business or most likely your home. But the Liberty Trike is fairly short, aside from just being narrow. It's a trike that fits into a very compact package. So we got Alec over here.
Hey everybody, how are you?
So Alec is from Electric Bike Technologies, which is like the parent company that does the Liberty Trike, as well as electrictrike.com and e-bike kits. So yeah, Alec is on here to kind of give you a sense for scale. And how tall are you, Alec?
I'm about 5'11", and you can see that it's very easy for me to get on and off this trike. And it's a small trike, but it's a comfortable ride despite my height.
Okay, so yeah, that's one thing I forgot to mention, talking about the proportions of it, is it's really easy to get on and off. The standover height on that is very short. We're looking at like maybe 16 inches or so to get your foot up and over that. So not too much more than a steep stair gets you on the bike, or on the trike rather. So the seat post is a regular 1-inch seat post, or 25.4 millimeters, and it's got a cool seat on there. So why don't you jump off there real quick and we'll show you the seat. So this is one of the newer upgrades for the Liberty Trike. It has a fairly wide seat. You're looking at about 11 inches wide on the footprint of the seat, and it has this backrest that kind of extends up and out. So that's a new addition from the Liberty Trike that I remember from years ago, and that's pretty cool. You know, they do that to respond to the customer's needs, because this has been a pretty popular trike for you guys, and they've got a lot of feedback on it likewise.
Yeah, and interestingly, this used to be an option, an upgrade on the Liberty Trike, and then we just made it a standard feature because it was so popular. So many people wanted an extra way to lean back and take it easy a little more, that now everybody gets a backrest on their Liberty Trike. Ah,
okay, so that's really cool. You kind of get a little bit behind the scenes on how that came about.
We really like to hear, you know, how people are responding to the trike and make changes based on that.
Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the mechanical specs, and we'll get into the real nuts and bolts of it. All right, we'll go ahead and start with the controls of the Liberty Trike, and it's pretty simple, pretty streamlined. Part of that is for the cost savings, to keep the cost of the trike down to something more affordable, and it's also pretty simple. I mean, as you can tell, a vehicle like this, you're not going to take in the Tour de France anytime soon. So the basic kind of components that you see on this, it serves that dual purpose. So on the right hand side, you have the throttle for the electric system, and we'll kind of get into that in a minute, and also this very small grip. So this is actually a different grip from the older Liberty Trikes. These handlebars have a pretty big rise to them. They kind of come up to meet the rider in a more natural hand position, that you can kind of get your hand in there and kind of grip it pretty well. And then coming down into this big dip where they have the display, and up to the other side. So this is for the front brake. This is a single lever for the brakes. This is like a big 4-finger lever, and it also has a parking brake on it, so you can kind of pinch that to not allow the bike to roll away, because it doesn't have a kickstand. As you can tell, it's a trike. And this is for the front disc, just for the front disc. And that comes down to the cabling here to this ProMax 300 caliper that's over this 160 millimeter brake rotor right here. In this fork, this is a solid steel fork, and it's pinching over with a pretty big motor cap, or sorry, with a pretty big cap over these like a 19 millimeter nuts on the front here. And this is held on here pretty strong. You'll notice that there's a small little tiny torque arm up on the front here to kind of maintain the integrity of the fork while the motor is putting out a fair amount of torque when it propels forward. And so that's coming up into this little mud flap, kind of a duckbill mud flap. And this is an upgrade too, isn't that right?
That's right, yeah. The front fender is also a new addition.
Okay, cool. So this front fender is new to me. That's how I noticed it. And that's pretty cool because previously the only fender you had was the controller. Which I guess it works, but not optimal. So this is coming up into, I guess, compared to the other trikes, that they have a fairly traditional headset and stem up here. So this does telescope. You can kind of open up this little quick release right here. Let's see, I need another hand. Open up that quick release, and then you can kind of adjust both the angle of the handlebars as well as telescope it up or down, or you can pull it all the way out if you got to pack this thing into a car. We'll kind of get into the folding aspect of it in a little bit. So yeah, coming down the frame, this is where you have the controller. We'll get into that in a sec. And we'll continue on with the specifications. So these are plastic pedals. They actually have a fairly good amount of tread on them for a plastic pedal. And they do have a core in the middle that is metal, but it's all plastic all around. And a lot of times you're probably not going to be pedaling a bike like this, and that's due to the relatively short cranks as well as the geometry and purpose of the bike. But these cranks are 6 inches. Yep. Which is an American size because this is an American crank set where it's a solid piece of metal that goes along the crank and then through the bike itself and then out the other side.
And that's another change from the last time that you got to ride a Liberty trike, which is that instead of the 4.5-inch cranks original and the 36-tooth chainring, now we've got a larger 40-tooth ring and longer cranks, and that's based on people saying that they wanted to pedal a bit more, so we lengthened that out in order to allow you to pedal at more moderate speeds.
Okay, so yeah, that's a really good point, because when I tried the Liberty trike years ago, it had that smaller chainring. Yep. And also the cranks are really small, and so the result was when you pedal it, it felt like I was tiptoeing. You know, felt like I'm just trying to run while tiptoeing is a strange combination. So they've listened to their customers and kind of changed that as a result to make it more usable to pedal the bike if you run out of battery or if you just want to move your legs a little bit. So yeah, so there's not too much going on in the back area other than the fact that they changed this part of the seat stay. So it used to be a nice big curve, and now it is 2 straight tubes, and the reason for that was heel clearance. Is that right?
Exactly. We wanted to increase the amount of space here for people with bigger feet, especially when we install the longer cranks. So now that the cranks are longer, you need more room for your legs to go around. So we've got a little extra clearance here so that you can pedal without hitting the back of the seat stays, even with the longer cranks. And then in this area also, we've added another chain guard mount in order to hold the chain guard still, especially as your heels spin around near it. So anybody who's had their chain guard moving around, now it's secured in 3 points.
Awesome. Why don't you go ahead and jump on the bike and we'll see your foot in relation to that pedal, what you're talking about. Okay, so yeah, Alec is here and he's got still some good clearance there. I'd say at least an inch or so on that natural position. And they've done that to kind of extend it just a little bit based on the crank, like you said. So that's pretty good, you know, really nice addition. Okay, so following down the rest of the bike through the chain here. So this chain comes into a 20-tooth sprocket in the back, and you see there's a little bit going on here, and I'll have Alec kind of get into the details, but for right now the purpose of this is to allow the coaster brake, which is kind of like the brakes that you've probably seen from the years past, where when you pedal backwards, that's what engages the rear brake. But how does that exactly work with the jack chain? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So in order to use the coaster brake, we need a way to hook the chain up to the axle. So what you see going on back there with the 2 chains is when you pedal, the long chain drives the coaster brake hub from the input sprocket. You pedal, the output sprocket on the coaster brake connects to the axle, drives your wheels around for you. In order to get the intuitive back pedal brake, which is great because it's ubiquitous, it's a very American, authentic experience, and it's really easy to use. You don't have to use your hands to brake. In order to get that, when you pedal backwards, the long chain clicks a pawl in the coaster brake hub, and then the short chain on the coaster brake hub stops the axle from moving. So in order to have the back pedal coaster brake, we've got 2 chains and that intermediary hub connected to your axle there.
Okay, so if I understand right, we're looking at the main sprocket right here, and then that's welded onto this coaster brake mechanism here that of course is connected by a secondary chain to the axle itself. So that, if I'm understanding this correctly, pedaling the bike of course goes through this system to pedal normally, and then when you're going backwards, it's only operating on this side without transferring over to the axle.
Yeah, so what happens in order to stop it, so the axle normally will spin if you're just coasting, and you'll see that as the axle spins, the short chain turns the coaster brake hub.
Right.
When we want to stop with the coaster, we stop the hub, and the hub is connected with a fixed chain to the axle, and so now we're braking.
Ah, wonderful. So while we're back here, I also wanted to point out the axle, because this is a rather peculiar system I haven't seen, because most of the time it's a straight axle going all the way through, but this one is coupled together right in that section. How does that work?
Yeah, so this is another change that we've made for the 2020 model year. This is what you would call a flexible shaft coupling. So in the back we have a 15mm axle, but unlike some of the earlier axles we did, it's in two pieces. You have a short axle over here, and you have a second axle over here. And in the middle, it's connected with a flexible shaft coupler. The coupler, when I spin the wheel, the coupler is spinning the free axle over here, so that the axle is always moving, so that the bearings are always carrying load. That's why they're connected. But the reason why they're on a flexible coupler and in two separate pieces is in order to allow the axle to always stay perfectly aligned with the bearings. So this increases the bearing life of the rear axle bearings here. We've got a bearing set in the frame here, we've got another bearing set in the frame here, another one, and another one. So we have two on each side, 4 bearings total. These are sealed cartridge bearings. And when we have an axle this long, increase their longevity, we want the axle to stay aligned with the bearings within 1/2 degree. And so the split axle coupler lets them always stay aligned.
Now would be a good time to transition into the electric system. One last thing is the basket that rests on top of the rear of the Liberty Trike is actually not an added accessory. This comes on the Liberty Trike by default. And they've actually changed the orientation, so it used to be mounted horizontally, but now it's more mounted with the length of the trike. And it's also stronger. You know, these gauge of wires is pretty thick compared to the old one, so that's a good improvement that they've done. So in Liberty Trikes past, as well as this one, there is a battery that is mounted up onto the frame. This is a 36 volt 8 amp hour battery pack, and they've actually lowered the capacity of the battery for a good reason that we'll get to. So to kind of show you how it operates, you can pull this plug out so long as the bike isn't fully operating, and then you twist this key to kind of unlock the battery from its pin, and then you can actually slide the battery out off of that rail. And Alec, why is that a smaller battery capacity, by the way?
Yeah, we're trying to do two things. One, we'd like to reduce the overall weight of the trike, so we have a smaller battery, and a lot of people aren't using, the full 26-mile maximum range of the old Liberty Trike battery. This will give you a maximum range of about 19 miles, which is probably adequate for this kind of bike. And based on the feedback we've heard, most people are not riding anywhere near as far. But the primary reason is to allow you to carry this on an airplane. So this is under the 300 watt hour maximum battery size for carry baggage by the FAA regulations. So you can check your Liberty Trike in your check baggage, you can remove your battery and carry it with you on board the airplane, let the airline know that you have a very large battery with you, and it's just under, this is the largest battery that you'd be allowed to carry on an airplane.
So that's the battery mechanism. On this bike, it does not have a pedal assist. There are other trikes from these guys that have a pedal assist system that is built into the bottom bracket or so, but on this one, it is just a throttle. So let's go ahead and we'll turn it off and turn it on again to kind of show you the basic startup of it. So here on the left-hand side of the handlebars, you have a control switch for operating the electric system. If you press and hold the letter I, that will start up, and it'll show you a couple of things. It'll show you your odometer, your current speed, and also the assist level based on the throttle, as well as your battery. So this actually has a little cartoon for the battery, kind of a display that shows you what you're at. So right now we're a little above half on the battery. And this is all controlled with the throttle on the right-hand side. As you twist the throttle, that will engage the motor up in the front, and when you let go, it will spring back into position. This trike does have a forward and reverse function, so if you press this little button in and make it small, then twisting the throttle will move the trike backwards. And of course, that speed is capped at about like 4 miles an hour, about. And then when you press that button again and pull the button out, then it'll go forward once again. You don't have to like get off the bike, or you don't have to, do anything with the display. You just have to not be moving. One important point, if you're going along full throttle, about 10 miles an hour or so, and if you kind of tap or goose that reverse button, then the throttle will deactivate from that point and it will let you coast. And they do that as a safety feature so that you're not going full gore on throttle and then press that button to try to go in reverse and throw you off the trike or anything. So that's a pretty cool thing that they've programmed into the system. So continuing on to the left side of the controls, you have a plus and a minus button to increase or decrease the amount of throttle. That not only changes the cap of the throttle, but it also changes the curve. So if you have it cranked up all the way to level 5 and then you give this thing full juice, it's actually going to kind of ramp up fairly easily. This is definitely not a speed demon kind of vehicle, so it's going to ramp up pretty easy. And if you decrease that level by pressing down or negative on the remote switch, that's going to lower this top right indicator, and likewise when you give it full throttle, it's going to go slower and slower. So yeah, that's how that operates. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention, when you give it some power, you'll see that there is a little power indicator that pops up underneath the battery, so you can kind of see how much juice you're using at that particular time, which is pretty neat. There is a walk assist button on the bottom of the remote switch here. If you press and hold that, then it'll kind of do a very tiny throttle, just enough to actually move the vehicle alongside if you're walking with it. This is a very popular feature in some countries, but here in the good old US of A, it's not terribly common. So coming down to the motor, we'll talk about that. So this is a 500 watt direct drive motor that's inside of this hub. So of course it has some nice big metal spokes that aren't going to need truing anytime soon because they're solid, and that's what's powering the whole trike. So you do have a front hub drive, which a front hub drive is not something I'd recommend for mountain biking, but when you're going easy on the street, it's fine. It works really good. For this kind of purpose, it's a great choice. So while we're at it, let's talk about the controller. This is an air-cooled controller that's mounted underneath the main tube for the frame right there. This is the brains of the operation. So there's not a whole lot you need to, it doesn't really interact with the rider at all. This just kind of does all the thinking because it takes input from the rider, primarily up on the controls, the throttle and the display, and then it turns that into a moving vehicle. Which, by the way, why don't we jump on the Liberty Trike and get it moving? Okay, so I'll start this one off by pedaling, just pedaling. It's a single speed, so I don't have to worry about changing any gears per se. You just kind of go, and it's pretty simple. All right, here we go. Kind of rotate that a little bit. See, I'm going about 6 miles an hour based on the pedal assist, and you know, it's when you're just pedaling, it's pretty comfy. You know, you don't worry about turning, which can, you know, kind of be magnified when you hit on the electric motor. Let's go ahead and take a little bit sharper turn there. A little bit sharper. So you kind of, if you're going fast, you got to adjust your weight when you turn, which is normal. I mean, it's normal for any bike, let alone trike. Let's go ahead and give it full guts and see. All right, so at this point the pedals are just kind of a formality, and there we go. All right, so riding full throttle is a fun thing. This trike is definitely intended for throttling. It's still capable of pedaling if you had to, but yeah, throttle's really where it's at for this kind of a vehicle, which is great. When you pedal backwards, I mean, the throttle still has power, the motor still has power when you hit the coaster brake in the back to pedal backwards. So you can kind of create a little bit of like an artificial friction or something. Or I guess it's real friction, it's just not due to the road at all. So that is one thing to consider if you brake with your feet a lot. If that's something that you're used to, then you might want to, you know, test it out a little bit, you know, make sure you get the hang of it. A lot of brakes, including the disc brake on the front, have a electric cutoff switch, meaning that when you press on the brakes, that sends an electric signal down to the motor to not allow power to get through. However, that's not present on the coaster brake. So that's kind of a safety thing. It's a safety thing to have a brake cutoff in the first place, and it's not available for a coaster brake that I've ever seen. So that's one thing that you gotta, you know, kind of one of the trade-offs is that it's a safe vehicle to ride all in all, but that is one extra kind of redundant feature where they have it on one brake but not on the other. So yeah, that's one thing to kind of look out for, one kind of, you know, question mark in my book. But yeah, other than that, I mean, riding at a higher speed, around 10 miles an hour or so, that's about where I start to get nervous on tight turns. It's you know, the shorter wheelbase side to side in the back, that's kind of what does it. It has a really narrow wheelbase so that it can fit indoors, so that they can keep the shipping costs down, that kind of thing. However, that does mean that when you take tight turns, you got to start shifting your weight from side to side to accommodate. Because yeah, this bike is, I mean, at full guts, you can definitely do some risky things. All right guys, so here we are at the Liberty Trike. I got the camera pointed down at the pedals. I'm going to pedal alongside the throttle at some point. I got the throttle cranked up to level 5 assist, so let's go ahead and take it for a spin. All right, so I did a little bit of off-road there, but yeah, at about 11 miles an hour, 11 and a half is where this thing caps out on the throttle. And I think that's pretty comfortable, because when you start to turn at that speed, it's a little tough because you got a lot of the rider weight up high. But yeah, on the off-road section, it was definitely going a little bit slower to handle all the bumps. I wouldn't call this a terribly comfortable bike, but you know, I'm kind of testing it outside of what it was intended for, which is pretty smooth sailing. So yeah, pretty good overall. Okay, so right behind me, there are a lot of different colors for the Liberty Trike. Let's just go ahead and show you. So they have kind of like this pearl white, they've got a gloss black, they've got kind of like this electric blue down to like almost a muted purple, hot pink. They have red, orange, yellow, teal, and then dark green. So lots of different colors to choose from. Pretty cool to see them all laid out like that. All right guys, thanks for joining me on checking out the Liberty Trike with some of the new additions for the new model year. It's pretty cool. I like the way that it's kind of changing just a little bit in order to meet the needs that the customer has, because it's a very, it's a very specific kind of vehicle, something that's made for a particular customer. So I think it's pretty cool. So yeah, if you want to check out the full write-up for this trike along with all the specifications and measurements, you can go to electricbikereview.com. There you can also check out this bike along with all the other trikes from the same parent company, Electric Bike Technologies, that also runs electrictrike.com. So I've been here reviewing trikes for a couple of days now already, and it's been great. So if you want to compare this with other trikes, you can also see that at electricbikereview.com. You can also participate in the forums and kind of ask a question, interact with the community, that sort of thing. So yeah, thanks for watching guys. Ride safe.